Hey everyone, before we pull back the curtain on this one, I just want to give you a quick heads up. Today's episode is going to be probably the heaviest conversation that we've had on this podcast thus far. We're going to be talking very candidly about power, about sexual exploitation, specifically with minors, and overall just predatory behavior within the photography industry. It's really an uncomfortable look at the shadow side of our craft. So if you've got kids in the car or if you're just not in the right headspace to go there, I totally understand. I get it. Feel free to sit this episode out or save it for later, and I'll see you in the next one. London, 1886. A respected doctor stands before a mahogany-framed mirror, and in his hand holds a crystal vial. He's a man of science, a man of standing. He tells himself that he will only do this once, and then he drinks. He doesn't grow horns. He doesn't sprout claws. He simply becomes lighter. The weight of Victorian morality and the heavy wool of his reputation just slides cleanly off his shoulders. And the first time, it just requires a little bit of the right chemistry, a vial, a ritual. But by the end of this story, it doesn't. Hyde eventually stops waiting for an invitation. He just arrives on his own. A model sitting in a wide open studio shifts her weight on an apple box under the warm, dim glow from a large parabolic umbrella. Carly, can you bring your chin down for me? Good. You're being a little guarded, Carly. I can feel the wall that you've put up. Carly, can you breathe through your mouth? Just a hair. It feels more authentic. Carly, the shirt is fighting the light. It's too much fabric. It's distracting from the vulnerability that I'm looking for. Can you just slide your strap down? Let's do it all the way. Let's see the skin of the shoulder. It's for the story. Now, don't look at the lens. Look at me, Carly. I want to see you. And Carly does. The first time you do this, you tell yourself you're serving the art. But by the third time, you realize you're just serving access. Well, my name is Patrick Fuller, and this is the Terrible Photographer Podcast, where we have honest conversations about creativity, identity, and finding your voice. This is part 5 of a series I'm calling Heresies. And this particular episode might get me into some more hot water, but I'm here for it. But above that, though, this is the episode that should make all of us feel a little bit uncomfortable, perhaps more than any other episode that I've released. You know, we've spent this series talking about the external forces that threaten our creativity. We've deconstructed the gear cults. We've mourned the death of the still image, and we've vented our frustrations at the algorithms that turned our art into content. But today, my friends, we are putting down the shields, and we are taking a long, hard look in the mirror. I'm going to be talking primarily to the men today, but this isn't about gender politics. It's really about power. Specifically, the unique, intoxicating power we hold the moment we pick up the camera, and how that power is being weaponized, how the artist label is being used as a cover for manipulation and exploitation. We're talking about men who use our craft, your craft, to access and control others, all while telling themselves and the world that they're just capturing the soul. This isn't about those predators out there. It's about the shadow in us all. Because if you don't think you have a Hyde, you're the one most likely to let him hold the camera. This is episode 52. My friends, we made it to 52. I'm calling it the Hyde. And again, this one's uncomfortable. This one's aggressive. And yeah, though, this one matters. And before we get into it too much, here's an important question that I need to ask you from the jump, especially to my male counterparts. If this episode makes you defensive, ask yourself what you're defending. If this is your first episode, welcome. What an episode to jump in on. Feel free to skip around. There are no particular order. I always recommend that people go back to some of the episodes in the beginning. They're not the highest quality, not the same standard as we have today, but they definitely help you understand what we're trying to accomplish. If you have any thoughts, questions, qualms, hate mail, feel free to email me. My email is in the show notes. I always read everything. So with that said, let's get into it. So, we all think we know the story. We've seen the cartoons and the Halloween masks, but right now I want you to forget the Year 9 Spark Notes version and look at what Robert Louis Stevenson was actually whispering about in his 1886 novel, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's London, late October, and the air smells of sulfur and coal smoke. And inside a house of heavy velvet and polished silver, Dr. Henry Jekyll stands before a mirror. He is a man of impeccable posture. He is celebrated. He is the kind of man whose reputation is so pristine it's become a cage. He swallows the mixture. And there's no theatrical lighting here. There's no CGI bone shaping. There's just relief. The cage door simply swings open. The first time it required chemistry, a vial, a ritual, a specific decision. But by the end of the book, the potion is a formality. And Hyde begins to slip out while Jekyll is sleeping. He emerges during a walk in the park, and he stops waiting for permission because eventually the quote-unquote good man and the monster share the same pulse. This story isn't a Victorian science fiction. It's a study of the mechanism of permission. It's about finding a loophole that lets you act on your darkest impulses while still being able to look the good man in the mirror the next morning. I think about this story more than I would like to admit. It's one of my favorite books because photography, I think, has its own potion. And this particular potion, it doesn't glow, it doesn't bubble, it just clicks. So you hang the camera around your neck, and suddenly the societal contract changes. A lens is a glass barrier that grants you the right to do what others can't. It gives you permission to stare. In a coffee shop, staring is a transgression, but behind the viewfinder, it's observation, right? It gives you permission to direct, to tell a stranger to move, to breathe, to arc, to yield. It gives you permission to turn a human being into an object and call it a craft. And most of the time, this process is almost like clinical, right? You're worried about the catchlight at 10 o'clock or the way that the highlights are clipping on the fabric. You're Jekyll. You're the professional. You're the artist. But sometimes someone else meets Hyde. And Hyde doesn't bark or growl. Hyde speaks the language of the industry. He says, quote, "I'm not exploiting, I'm exploring. He says, I'm not using power, I'm directing. He says, this is art. If you're uncomfortable, you just don't understand the vision. The camera doesn't make a man a predator. But if there is already something in you that craves that quiet obedience of the room, if you like the way people go silent when you speak, the camera is just a very polite way to let that particular shadow breathe. The potion isn't the problem here. It's the loophole, because this story was never about the monster. It was about the man who wanted the excuse to be one. Photography is just the potion. And this, my friends, isn't theoretical.
His clients include young children posing for portraits and high school athletes in action. Don Sparks is a Frisco photographer who operates out of his home. It's where authorities arrested a 53-year-old for indecency with a child involving an 11-year-old girl.
The FBI describes him as a serial sexual predator, a professional photographer facing sex charges in 2 states after allegedly assaulting young models.
We are aware we have photographs and other videos related to individuals that we've not been able to identify.
The investigation started last fall when police in Carlsbad, California arrested Robert Coaster. Police say the 52-year-old admitted taking naked photos of an underage model.
San Antonio photographer is booked on a charge of sexual assault. And tonight, detectives say there may be more victims. Bexar County Sheriff's deputies arrested John Lill on Saturday. They say the man was hired for a boudoir photo shoot by the victim. During the sessions, she says Lill offered her wine. Soon after, she lost consciousness and reported that she was sexually assaulted by the photographer.
Celebrity photographer is accused of sexually assaulting at least 3 modeling clients during photo shoots at his private studio. Kenneth Dolan was arrested Monday, and tonight police are asking for other possible victims to come forward.
KTLA's Rick Chambers is live in Larchmont Village with the details. Rick.
Yeah, Cher, the studio is in the building that you see over my shoulder here. We understand that all 3 of the alleged victims were in their 20s, all relatively new to the business when they say this happened, and that Mr. Dolan had come highly recommended to them.
You know, there isn't even words for that. And to be honest, listening to those clips makes me want to put my gear in a box and tape it shut and never touch a camera again. It makes the craft that I love feel dirty. You know, I look at my hands, I look at the lens on my desk, and I think, how? How could you take this incredible tool, this thing meant to find light and capture the soul of a moment, and use it as a fucking weapon? How do you look through the viewfinder and see a target instead of a human being? It's a special kind of betrayal, you know. It's using a scalpel to wound instead of heal. And that's why this conversation, my friends, is so goddamn important. Because the men in these headlines didn't just hurt kids, women. They poisoned the well for every one of us. They turned our permission into a threat. But here's what we have to realize. Hyde doesn't start with a news headline. He doesn't start with a police report. He starts with the small things, the microaggressions that we've spent years ignoring because we didn't want to make it weird. This is not a binary. It's not a predator versus saint. It's more of a spectrum. And this spectrum matters because most of these guys moving along it don't think that they're a monster, you know. They think that they're Jekyll. They're professionals. They're artists. They have the rationales and the stories that they tell themselves, and they believe that helps them sleep at night. But we have to be brutally honest about the far end of that line. For some of these men, Jekyll is dead. He's been gone a long time. There's no internal struggle left. They've been entirely hollowed out morally. What's left is Hyde, wearing the title of quote-unquote professional like a skin suit. He doesn't give a shit about the art. He's simply using the camera as a high-tech skeleton key to get into rooms that he should never be allowed in. And that end of the spectrum, the camera isn't a tool of expression, it's a lure. But that descent follows a map. And I've spent years watching these patterns, studying them. And Hyde doesn't always look like a villain in a cape. Usually he looks like a guy with a Sony and a vision. And I see him in 4 distinct tiers, and they are this. First, you got your amateur. This is the one who uses his camera for access. Then you got your artist who uses aesthetics as cover. Then your specialist who focuses is uncomfortable, to say the least. And then you got your professional who uses power to normalize the abnormal. And listen, these aren't speculations. They are patterns that have been hiding in plain sight for a long time. And if you've spent any time in this industry, whether you're shooting or you're modeling, you're a stylist or you're a makeup artist or just watching, you've encountered at least one of them, probably all 4. So let's walk through them. And first, we're going to talk about the tourist of the flesh, right? The amateur. And there's a guy in every city, several guys most likely. Usually a recent camera purchase, a model mayhem profile, a quote-unquote building my portfolio brand, and they reach out to new models. And usually these are always artistic nudes, always exploring the female form. And let me tell you, his portfolio is bad. His lighting is flat. His composition is amateur at best. It's over-processed. It's terrible. But please hear me, this isn't the point. I actually don't give a shit on the quality of his images. The point is that he gets to be in a room with naked women, usually young, naked, vulnerable women. In photography, the camera gives him permission. It gives him permission to ask her to pose, to direct her body, to stare without consequence. This is Hyde borrowing Jekyll's coat. Which brings me to tier 2, which I'm calling the aesthetic architect. And then there's the guy with actual photographic skill. You know, he has good lighting. He shoots on clean backgrounds. He knows his way around the camera. His images, his portfolio are pretty decent. But his Instagram has artistic nudes. It's carefully composed, generally well lit, technically proficient, and somehow these models are always around the age of 18 and 19. Somehow always thin, somehow always posed in a way that feels a little not quite like art. And he tells himself, and anyone who asks, that he's just exploring the human form, that he's celebrating beauty, or worst, that he's empowering women, which makes me want to throw up in my mouth as I say it, that this is art, that this is his art. But his portfolio, let's be honest, looks like softcore porn with slightly better lighting. And you ask him why he doesn't shoot older women, different body types, men, he'll say, I shoot what speaks to me artistically. What speaks to him artistically is suspiciously identical to what straight men find sexually attractive. This is Hyde claiming to be Jekyll, which brings me to tier 3. This is where we get to the tier that makes parents like me a little angry and very uncomfortable. This isn't the guy shooting the local Little League team or the high school football game. This is a very specific in narrow but very present niche of photographers. But it's one that I think is very important and needs to be addressed. His portfolio is a relentless loop. Exclusively adolescent girls, aged 13 to 17, in leotards, in swimsuits, in gymnastics gear. There are mid-air suspensions, there's deep splits or intense, moody close-ups. Now, on the surface, he has his talking points ready to go. He calls it, quote unquote, capturing the grace of the athlete. He calls it things like the art of the movement, which is a header on his website. But when you look closer, there is a total vacuum of context. I'm not kidding, guys. As I was doing research for this episode, I found so many portfolios like this. Men where I assume have no connection to the world of dance, no daughters in the sport, no background even in athletics. I couldn't find any on their bios. There's just men with high-end, high-resolution cameras and a very, very specific interest in the most vulnerable demographics in youth sports. I'm talking dance, gymnastics, and swimming. And here is where Hyde shows his hand. It's in the defensiveness. Because if you ask a professional, let's say, architectural photographer why they only shoot brutalist concrete, they will give you a nerdy 20-minute lecture on the geometry and light. But when you ask a specialist why his portfolio is 100% adolescent females, the answer isn't a lecture, it's a reflex. He says things like, "This is my job. This is an art form. How dare you question my motives? Are you calling me a pedophile?" Now, I am asking a very specific question. Why you have a specialty that requires zero variety? Right? There's no adult dancers. Why no male athletes? Why not the grit of a soccer match or the sweat of a track meet? Why specifically the sports where the line between athletic wear and vulnerability is at its thinnest? In this industry, we know that patterns tell stories. And a pattern this specific usually reveals a truth that the artist label is trying to hide.
So if you're a man and you're a photographer and your photography is dance-based, but you're one of those photographers that shoots young girls and teenagers and you love to work for dance studios, you're weird. Dude, you're so weird. Out of all the jobs you could have had, that's what you chose. You call it art. You like taking photos of talented, flexible minors in leotards, okay? And I was one of them. Been there, done that. And I'm not even calling out one person. There are so many of you. And you're weird, dude. And moms out there, studio moms, don't let men be the photographers of your little girls. Yes, the photos are sick. They're so sick. But it's weird. And Shelly, how do you not think it's weird?
So this creator isn't calling for an arrest. She is just pointing out the weirdness. And she's right. It is fucking weird. It's a situation that isn't necessarily illegal, but it is fundamentally off. It's the specialist using the camera as a bridge to a world that he has no business being in. This is Hyde at his most manipulative, pretending to be deeply offended that you would have noticed the pattern. And he uses the sanctity of art and the work as a shield, betting on the fact that you will be too polite or too afraid of confrontation to call it what it is. But if your art requires a specific age and a specific lack of clothing to be graceful, you aren't a specialist. You're a predator with a portfolio. Which brings me to tier 4, the untouchable. Then there's the professional, the big name. He's got the reputation, the portfolio, the major clients. He works with top agencies. And there's rumors. There's whispers. There is a long list of models who won't work with him again, but won't say why publicly. And the industry knows, but they keep hiring him anyway because he's talented, because his work is edgy, because that's just how he is, quote unquote. Until one day, the cost of protecting him becomes too high. Then suddenly everyone claims they didn't know. This isn't a hypothetical, unfortunately. Enter Terry Richardson.
One of the most sort of famed photographers of the modeling industry is Terry Richardson, right? And he has had sexual harassment suit or claims against him over and over and over again, yet it seems that you're not a model unless you get photographed by Terry Richardson. Now, just using him as an example or as a sort of symbol of someone who thrives in the industry, yet there's all of these specific sexual predatory complaints about him. Is that generally how it works? That if you have enough clout in the industry, you can exist even though you do those things consistently or abuse your position? You're nodding your head.
Well, he has. He's still existing. I think almost every model has had an encounter with him, whether it be good or bad. I would say the majority are complaints, though. Most girls that I've talked to, whether or not they even shot with him, had done something compromising or had been asked to do something compromising. Myself, I knew when I was going to meet him, when I was going for a casting, I had already seen his books. I was very well aware of who he was, so I was prepared. But my agency also poised me, being like, this guy, he's a really good photographer. If you shoot with him, it's going to take you this, and there. And, obviously you want to make a good impression. Had I not been a little older of age and maybe one of these younger girls who the agency's also telling them to make a good impression.
Make a good impression, which can imply several things
lot of regrets.
To a young mind when you're being compromised.
Yes. So he has this caliber and is able to get away with it because, like we said, we don't have sexual harassment protections. There's nobody you can even tell, even if you tell your agency, they don't want to rock the boat because they don't want to ruin their relationship with this great photographer who might book one of the other girls who is going to take off her top,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it goes beyond taking off your top. We're talking about,
nice.
serious, allegations of sexual assault and abuse. And I have worked with Terry Richardson several times, and I wouldn't work with him again, based on those experiences. Yeah.
Now, is this because he propositions, or because he just asked you to get into compromising positions as a model?
It's well known within the industry that at his castings, and I haven't worked with him in a while. I don't know if he's still doing this, but he will. You're going to a casting to possibly shoot with him for Harper's Bazaar, who's one of his clients. That's a legitimate job, and he will ask you to take your clothes off at the casting, and in some cases, give him sexual favors. And I've spoken with other models who've been in these situations, and he makes you feel like you're being a prude or you're somehow weird if you're not willing to just go with the flow because it's all cool, it's all fine, and
but it's not all cool and it's not all fine because at the end of the day, if you don't do these favors, you don't get photographed by Terry Richardson, you don't end up in Harper's Bazaar. So it's not all cool and all fine, right? It's not like this cool free love thing. It's actually a business proposal.
Pressure, yeah.
And the choice between an uncomfortable sexual situation and your job, that's the definition of sexual harassment. And that happens frequently in our industry.
I was just going to say, this is one photographer that we're talking about, but how often does this happen with photographers, with people in the industry?
I think most people are professional. We're not trying to hate on the industry, but there are people who abuse their power. And
it's weird. It's like there are people who abuse their power in any industry, but because this industry happens to trade in, I would say, the female body for the most part, it ends up being a little bit more degrading at times in the way that people abuse their power, right?
Yeah, and there's this code of silence. No one wants to talk about it because you have to kind of grab the brass ring while you can. Our careers are very short-lived. Sometimes we're just working for a couple of years before we age out at the ripe old age of 21 or whatever. So, there's a lot of pressure to just keep your head down, not say anything.
So this is Hyde in full view. And Jekyll is standing by saying, well, I didn't know. Or let's not rock the boat. In 2012, the Model Alliance released a study that sent shockwaves through the industry. They found that 87% of models experienced unwanted sexual attention from photographers. 87%. And at that time, we told ourselves that it would be a wake-up call. And we promised to do better, but here we are. According to the 2024 #MeToo National Report, the needle hasn't moved at all. In fact, for women in the creative and freelance spaces, the rates of workplace harassment have remained stone cold steady since 2018, and the specifics are even more damning. Recent data from late 2025 shows that nearly 90% of models still report being asked to undress on set without any prior warning or mention in the brief. 1/3 report inappropriate touching during the shoot. This isn't a few bad apples or a historical footnote. This is a rotten orchard that we are all standing in and completely unaware, and we are not talking about. But here's where the part that I have to be honest with you and with myself, because it's easy to look at those numbers and point to, quote unquote, those guys, the predators, the monsters, the ones who make the news. And it's so easy to look at these four tiers, the amateur, the artist, the specialist, the professionals, and think that's not me. But I have to be honest with you. This isn't just about the predators. It's about the shadow, and not just their shadow, my shadow and your shadow, and anyone who has ever felt the weight of the camera in their hands, because Hyde isn't always a monster in the dark alley. Hyde is more subversive than that. Hyde is the quiet, intoxicating ego stroke you feel when the model says, I trust you. He's the rush of validation that comes from being needed. He's the high of realizing that you can move a human being like a piece of furniture and they will let you. It isn't always sexual. Most of the time, it's just power, and power feels good. And listen, I've felt it, I would be a liar if I said I had it. There is a moment on every set, usually a brief, quiet, and dangerous moment where you realize that you are the master of the space. The model is looking to you for direction. You tell her how to move, where to look, how to breathe sometimes. And it's not just the model, right? The stylist, the hair and makeup artist, the assistants, all looking to you for direction. And in that moment, you feel the importance. You feel the control. You can feel the power start to go to your head. This isn't predatory, but it is a version of the Hyde. So this isn't about those guys over there. This is about a constant daily self-audit. It's about asking yourself, What does this camera give me permission to do? And am I using that permission to protect the person or persons in front of me? Or am I using it to serve a need that I'm too afraid to examine or admit? Because once you realize the camera gives you power, you have two choices. You can be a steward of that trust, or you can feed the thing in the mirror. Okay, so photography gives you things that most people don't get. We talked about this in the intro, right? You have permission to stare. And in normal social context, staring is aggressive, it's invasive, it's creepy. But photographers like us, we get to stare. It's part of the job, right? We study the subject, we analyze the light, we frame the composition. The camera makes staring professional, you know? We also have the permission to ask for vulnerability, right? We ask questions like, can you remove your jacket? Can you lie down? Can you arch your back a little bit more? Can you give me something more sensual if it calls for it? In a normal context, these requests would be seen as harassment, right? If you said them in your workplace, a normal workplace, you would definitely be fired. But photographers like us get to make them because they are directing the shoot. And we have permission to be in the same space, sometimes close space, with somebody in a vulnerable state. Right? A model naked or nearly naked in a private space following your directions. In other professions, does that dynamic exist beyond doctors without being immediately suspicious? No, it doesn't. We have permission to control the images. You know, we get to decide what gets shot. We decide what gets edited, what gets published, what gets kept. The model trusts you that you won't misuse them. But you have all the power. And the artist label that we all wear provides social cover. And if somebody questions your motives, this is art, you just don't understand. If someone asks why all of your subjects are young, attractive women, you say, that's my aesthetic. If someone points out the power dynamic, you're sexualizing your work, this is about beauty. If the camera gives you permission, the artist label gives you protection, and underneath, Hyde gets to act. And when I bring this up to photographers, and I talk to a lot of photographers about this because I'm passionate about it, the exploitation, the power dynamics, the pattern, I usually get the same responses. But the models say yes. The models want to shoot. Some models even like the attention. And whenever I hear this, it makes me kind of nauseous. Not because it's completely false, but because it misses the entire goddamn point. I want to talk about consent for a couple minutes because, yes, a model says yes, but consent under power imbalance isn't clean consent. So let's be clear about the power dynamic. You're the photographer, you control the shoot. You control the direction, you control the images, you control what gets published. The model, she's been following your lead, trusting your expertise, hoping you'll make her look good, hoping this will lead to more work. You have the power, not her. And when someone with power asks someone without power to do something, yes doesn't always mean I enthusiastically want to do this. Sometimes when they say yes, it means I don't want to seem too difficult, or I don't want to lose this opportunity, or I don't want to make him angry, or everyone else does this, so I guess I have to. Or if I say no, he won't hire me again. And if this energy changes in the room after you ask something, you already know the answer. I want you to think about every other profession where someone has power over someone vulnerable, right? Teachers and students, doctors and patients, bosses and employees, therapists and clients, police officers and the person that they're detaining. In every one of those contexts, we recognize that the power imbalance makes consent complicated. A freshman college student might consent to a sexual relationship with a professor, but we would still call it exploitation because the teacher in that context has the power. A patient might consent to a doctor's advances, but we would still call it malpractice because the doctor has the power. Do you see the pattern here? But photographers, we act like sometimes this power dynamic doesn't exist. We act like she signed the release is the same as this was ethical. It's not. Please hear me. It's not. And here's the uncomfortable truth that I need to say because I've argued it countless times to male photographers of all ages, from photographers in their 20s to photographers older than my father. 18 or 19-year-olds make decisions that aren't always in their best interest. The prefrontal cortex is not even fully developed, right? And please hear me. I'm not saying that they're children. They are legal adults. I'm not saying that they can't consent to anything. But what I am saying is a 19-year-old model who's been told her whole life that her value is in her appearance, who's trying to break into the modeling industry that chews people up, who's been directed by a 44-year-old photographer with a reputation and a portfolio, that 19-year-old might say yes to things that she wouldn't say yes to if the power was equal. Not because she's stupid, but because she's young and because the power dynamic makes it really hard to say no. And as a photographer, us, as the person with the power, it is your responsibility. It is our responsibility to recognize that. It's not hers, it's not her responsibility, it's ours. The fact that she's willing to do it doesn't mean you should ask her to. Listen, I've had models offer to remove clothing that wasn't on the shot list. I've said, we're good, we've got it. I've had models ask if I want them to pose differently, more sensual, suggestive, more exposed. I've said, no, the brief is what we agreed upon. Not because I'm morally superior, please hear me, but because I know she's not offering because she wants to. She's offering because she thinks that's what I want, or because she thinks it'll get her more work, or because that's what she thinks professional models do. More than once, I've had to work with models to unlearn bad behavior that they've learned from other photographers. My job, our job, is to hold the boundary, not hers. And there's a question here that changes everything. And this is really important. I want you to ask yourself, if there was a video of the entire shoot, every word, every direction, and that video was played back for a room of your peers, or let's take it up a notch actually, a judge in a courtroom, would you look like a professional? Would you look like a craftsman? Or would you look like a man using a camera to get what he wants? If the thought of a witness makes you uncomfortable and sweat, you've already crossed the line. So a model told me about a shoot once. A commercial client, e-commerce work. There's a clear brief. This particular photographer was established. They had a good portfolio. And when the model showed up, she expected a team, but it was just him. That was the first red flag because she's a professional. She just continued. The first few setups were fine. Everything was going smooth. And then the photographer out of nowhere asked, "Can you remove your bra? It's showing through the shirt." It was reasonable, technically, but not discussed beforehand. It was borderline. But she does it. She feels a little uncomfortable, but doesn't want to seem too difficult. The next setup, the photographer said, quote, "Let's try something more sensual." The client wants skin. She asked what the client requested specifically. He deflects though. He says, "Just trust me, I know what they want." She told me there was this silence after he asked. I was calculating, do I say no and risk him never hiring me again? Do I say no and seem unprofessional or difficult? Do I just do it and hate myself after? That silence probably lasted 3 seconds, she said, but it felt like an hour. She finished the shoot, walked to the car, felt violated, but couldn't name how. Later, after talking to some other models, she found out that was a pattern. Same photographer, same language, same story. He never did anything technically illegal, never touched her, never explicitly coerced. She technically consented, but he knew exactly what he was doing. And he's still shooting to this day. So why am I talking about this? You know, maybe you're a landscape guy. Maybe you're a headshot photographer. Maybe you're whatever photographer, you know. And here's how I would respond. Because every time a photographer exploits a model, the trust in all of us erodes. And when that trust erodes, safety becomes choosing the safest option, which is always the female photographer. And it's not because all male photographers are predators, but because enough are that pattern matching is just, well, safer. And that's what happens when the trust is broken over and over again. The innocent always pay for the guilty, and the craft suffers. But more than the lost work, right? I don't mind losing work to female photographers. Please hear me. I think what pisses me off most is because it hurts the craft as a whole. The camera is a tool. It's like a scalpel. It's like a pen. And when you use a tool to harm people, you ruin the tool for everyone. Look, I love photography. I love what I do. I love to tell stories with the image. I love the way I can capture light and the moment and humanity. And I hate that the craft that I love is being co-opted by predators who use it as permission. And here's what makes this systemic. It's not just individual. That the industry sometimes rewards this because agencies sometimes push for edgy work, which often means sexualized. Brands quietly hire photographers with rumors because they, quote unquote, get the vibe. The aesthetic and attention-based economy we're in monetizes youth, thin bodies, sexualized poses. What sells? Young women, attractive women, women posed in ways that appeal to the male desire. There is an undercurrent of economics to all this. So when a photographer builds a portfolio of sexualized images of young women and calls it art, he's not defying the market. He's actually serving it. It's on us, not the models. it's on us. We're the ones with the power. We're the ones with the camera. We're the ones controlling the shoot. The model's job is to show up and trust us. Our job is to be worthy of that trust. And if you cannot handle that responsibility, you should not be shooting. So I need to tell you about a shoot that I did earlier in my freelance career. I was green, I was hungry, and to be blunt, I was a little bit reckless. It was a fitness shoot. The client wanted to build her quote unquote influencer portfolio, whatever that means. She suggested we shoot at her apartment complex gym. I said, okay, which was mistake number one. I showed up alone. No makeup artist, no assistant. I couldn't afford them. She was only paying me like $500. So there wasn't any witness, right? It was just me, my gear, and this 22-year-old woman who I just met in a private gym in an apartment complex in San Diego. We started normal, pretty normal, like fitness type images, squats, warm-ups, standard fitness type stuff. I don't know. But then the energy shifted at some point. She said that she was sweating and warm and that the shirt was in the way, so she took it off. She was wearing this sports bra, technically still in the lane of fitness. I kept shooting. Then the poses got a little weird, provocative, like not fitness provocative, just like suggestive. And then it happened. She sat at the end of a weight bench and started to move her hand down her shorts. I froze. I must admit, I froze. In that moment, I didn't know what to do. I finally mustered up the courage to ask her what she was doing. Never been in that position before. She looked surprised and awkward. She asked, "Do you have a problem with it?" And I said, "Yeah, this isn't in the scope. I'm not quite comfortable with this." And after a few more uncomfortable minutes of shooting more benign content, I packed my gear and I got out of there. But as I was driving home, I wasn't feeling like the hero, the moral hero, right? I was feeling like, to be honest, I was feeling like a dumbass. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, right? I've heard it in conversations with photographers, and I guarantee you someone right now is listening to this, thinking to themselves or saying out loud, "See, Patrick, sometimes it's not the photographer. Sometimes it is the model." And you're right, it is. Sometimes the person in front of the lens has their own agenda. Sometimes they want to push boundaries. Sometimes they want to use the model label to explore things that they shouldn't be exploring in a professional setting. Or worse, they're looking for something more destructive, like to harm or to extort. And that has happened. It's real, but it's rare. But here is the hard truth that we all have to swallow. Even in that case, it's still your fault because I fucked up that day. Not because I did something predatory, right? But because I was lazy and cheap. I was too cheap to hire an assistant. I was too cool to insist on a third party. And I was too stupid to realize that being alone in that room, I had removed every professional safety rail. And let's be honest, anything could have happened in that gym. It would have been her word against mine. I had the fancy gear, but I had zero protection. And I let it continue way longer than I should because I was experiencing my own version of that fear response. I was afraid of the confrontation. I wanted to keep things light. I didn't want to be uncool. I didn't want to be the photographer to kill the vibe. This is Hyde in his most pathetic form, the coward. Most of the horror stories in this industry don't start with this villainous plot, right? They start with simple unprofessionalism. They start with a male photographer who doesn't want to pay a makeup artist for a 4-hour booking. They start with, let's just shoot at my place to save money. They start with a refusal to send a shot list because I like to be spontaneous. When you strip away the professional structure, you are inviting that shadow to come in. You are creating a vacuum where power can be abused either by you or against you. And look, if you are the one with the camera, you are the steward of the room. That means it is your job to build the fence. It is your job to say, well, we don't shoot alone. It is your job to say, if it isn't on the brief, it doesn't happen. We use our power to protect the model. Yes, absolutely. We also use our power to protect the integrity of the craft, because every time a shoot turns quote unquote weird, even if it's the model initiated it, the entire industry takes a hit. And if you are too lazy to set boundaries, you're not a professional. You're just a guy with a camera waiting for something to go wrong. So, just to let you know, here's my protocol. I never shoot intimate work alone, right? I always have a makeup artist or stylist on set, always. I have a shot list or a mood board, which I send at least 48 hours in advance. This mood board and shot list must be signed, contract signed. We discuss wardrobe. My contract specifies what won't happen, not just what will. Before the shoot, we talk about expectations. We review the mood board. I tell the model that she can end the shoot at any time. There's no questions, no pressure. My goal is simple, no surprises ever. I have an allergy, a deep allergy for surprises on both sides. And it's not because I'm virtuous, please hear me. It's because I've learned from failure and because I know that power corrupts. And in those contexts where I am on set and I have the camera, I have the power. So I build systems that protect the model and protect me from myself. Listen, Hyde never disappears. The camera will always give permission. The power will always feel good. The responsibility never goes away. I don't trust photographers who say they don't have a Hyde. I trust the ones who admit they do and build systems to contain him. This isn't about perfection, it's about vigilance. Every photographer has power. Power always distorts perception. The work requires a constant self-audit, not once, continuously. Why this subject? Why now? Why them? What does this give me permission to do? Am I serving the shoot, the client, or am I just serving my shadow? If you can't answer honestly, you shouldn't be shooting it. In Stevenson's story, Jekyll loses control. Hyde starts merging without the potion, takes over more and more, until Jekyll can't come back. At first, he needs the potion. By the end, he doesn't. So, until next week, stay curious, stay courageous, and yeah, stay terrible.